Welcome, everybody. Today, I'm very excited to have Dora Boussias with me today. Thank you for joining me. Dora comes with quite an extensive history in data analytics, enterprise architecture, digital transformation, and really leading technology within organizations. Now, you've just moved to starting your own company, Dora B Global, which is awesome. So, welcome to Blueprints, Dora, and please tell us a little bit more about you and what you do.
Thank you, Deirdre. I'm so happy to be here. I really appreciate the invite, and I look forward to us having this conversation. It's my honor to be here. Dora Boussias, yes, most people know me from having been in data. I speak a lot about data, AI, leadership, driving transformation, and like you said, a lot about enterprise architecture, going deep in data and information architecture. So where I am, about 30 years in the corporate world, worked for world-renowned companies like GE, Prudential, Stryker, my last employer, which means I've had exposure into different diverse verticals, including financial services, healthcare, medical technology within healthcare, but others as well, insurance, education, a little bit of retail early on. And throughout my career, I would say that from early on, I was really fortunate to realize a couple of things. I'll tell you the story. When I first started, straight out of school, actually, I started as a COBOL mainframe programmer. And what I realized is that every week we would create these reports that were all about financial reporting on the big, do you remember those big green
Yes.
and white striped, right, printouts, right? And I remember the manager of the team that I was working on was bringing all these reports every Friday, if I remember correctly, up to the CFO and the other C executives, right? And I realized, okay, they're looking at these reports, they're looking at data. If these things are wrong, they're basing the decision on wrong information. That's where my passion for data came in. And 30 years in corporate, data has been always there, a common thread. But the other thing too, I was always also very cognizant of the fact that we're building solutions. They are to answer those questions. So it's not just about the technology, it's about the business. And I've always been business minded. However, I thought to myself, okay, these solutions, I don't want to just deploy, put something out there, and then we have to fix it all over again 6 months later after we go live because we just did not do enough due diligence to think through the end-to-end picture, which is why I've really dedicated my career or most of my career going deeper into data, that is data management, data governance, MDM, data information architecture, as well as just the end-to-end view of things. That's why enterprise architecture was just so natural for me. I've done software development earlier on in my career, but enterprise architecture, anything around data and now data and AI governance especially, has always been there. But later in my career was really driving transformation. So it was especially from the data management perspective, data governance perspective of things, including architecture, is okay, like thinking ahead, what can we do um, that will help us deliver, design, implement, deliver scalable solutions. So it was less about the technically how we do it, yes, but also just put the thinking into how do I set this up as a solid foundation. So really, I would take all of that, put the business case together, have done that a couple of times in my career, presented to executives. I got them to understand what it is, got the investment, and really build the function from the ground up. So for 30 years, data, architecture, driving transformation at the global level at global organizations. But after 30 years, I thought to myself, okay, I think it's time for me to do something different. And really, it's all coming around impact. How can I make more impact? And that's what really triggered my living corporate. That's one of the reasons that triggered my living corporate this year, earlier this year, and going into business for myself. And we can go more into it if interested, but that's like where I am right now.
You also got a Global Leadership Award, the 2024 HMG Global Leadership Institute Award. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Thank you. I am so grateful and so fortunate, actually.
Congratulations.
One of the things that I've done, which helped showcase to the world not only what I do, but also part of what I've been doing is really sharing with the world what I know out of how can I help people. If I'm learning things, and also if I see throughout my career things where we keep on falling into the same pitfall, same mistakes, I have a viewpoint. And I've always been very active about sharing this. So, this is what opened up the walls for me in terms of speaking at conferences. I've done probably close to 30 podcasts right now. And that's what just made it a little bit more evident out there in the industry what I'm all about and how I help my business, my organization, and the folks, right? So that's what the award actually, this is the second time that I'm getting the HMG Strategy Global Leadership Award. And I was in New York City 2 weeks ago where I was honored receiving the AI 100 award. I've also
Nice.
been recognized as part of the CDO Magazine Informatica's Global Power Women 2 years in a row. So I'm really fortunate and very grateful. But it's really been a byproduct of me just doing the best that I can for my organization, but also just sharing my lessons because I want to share my lessons and because I also wanted to influence the industry, especially coming from the perspective of how can we think end to end and what are all the different things that we learned over the years versus falling into the same mistakes over and again, which I think is something common with people in enterprise architecture, right? We keep on talking about think about the holistic picture, think about end to end, think about the downstream. So a lot of what I've been speaking is that, not only, but a lot of it is that as well.
Congratulations. That's
Thank
wonderful
you.
news. Let's quickly talk about women in data. So I
Yes.
imagine it's quite different 30 years ago to what it is today. Have you noticed any difference between what it was when you started to what it is today?
I've noticed difference in myself, not necessarily actually in the industry in the business. And it's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked this question, Deirdre, because I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm focusing on going forward. So I just said I left corporate, and this is brand new, really. I have not shared this before, and I'm focusing on how I position my business going forward. So I decided, in one word, really what I want to bring out to the world is impact. So, how do I make more impact? And so, I want to take everything that I know about data and leadership and career, because what I thought as a woman in tech, also an immigrant, because I was 17 years old when I relocated to the United States. I hardly spoke the language and then went through college, and then I got into the world of tech, right, as a program and so forth. And as I'm sure many women or immigrants, or let's just call it minority groups, right, there are specific situations and challenges and hurdles to get over. And I'm very passionate about taking what I know and sharing it. As a matter of fact, so many times I say, I wish I knew 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, what I know today. So here's what I'm going to say about that. First of all, I realized that I've changed, but even as I've gotten more and more senior, I got into executive roles, the learning doesn't stop. So that was realization number one. Realization number two is that even though, yes, we're talking more about it and we're trying to be more inclusive and drive diversity and equity and inclusivity, there's still challenges. I don't know if concerned is the right word, but I noticed earlier in the year how many organizations actually pull back on the investment on D&I programs. We're still at about, give or take a couple percentage points depending the study, about 28% female leaders.
Mhm.
There's many women in the world. There's so many of us in the business world as well. To think that gender is holding someone from getting into STEM fields to me is just unfathomable. And then if we are entering this field and about a quarter of leadership to be represented by women only, when there's at least 50-50, right? There's so much. All of the products, if anything, I would argue, and I believe there are studies saying that women make a lot more of the decisions in the household, right? As consumers, as homemakers, as making decisions, buying decisions for properties, for cars, for our children, education, consumer products, right? So to only have about a quarter or so representation of women in leadership, to me, it's a sad situation. So going forward, actually, Dora Be Global, there's a couple of different things that I'm focusing on. I really just want to take everything that I've learned over the 30 years and bring impact. So on the data leadership, I really want to advise leaders, and I'm working with a couple of startups right now, to take all of that business, technical, and data and AI expertise and help shape direction. And what I found is, especially in tech, many leaders, they might know what they need to do, but they don't know how to communicate and get the buy-in so they can get the funding that they need and then implement. So I want to work with those leaders, help them not only bring the data and tech expertise in, but also just coaching in terms of, hey, what is the best way to communicate about this to put together a business case?
Mm.
But the whole coaching, I want to take it a step further. And I'm actually very passionate. I'm focusing on data excuse me, women and immigrants, especially women, but other mid-career people that I see so much are just getting stuck in their career sometimes. So a huge focus on my program going forward is really, again, taking everything that I learned in the last 30 years, on building the program, and I want to bring it out there to help people in mid-career that they feel that they're stuck, not understood, not heard, passed over for promotions, all of these things that we know. And I hear it, and I felt it in the past myself. Just take everything I know and help these people, coach them to really just reach their full potential. I'm very passionate about that. I've had a couple of personal instances, situations throughout my career that happen, which is why I want to focus on it going forward.
Nice.
And that's one area that I know I am very passionate about. How do I make a difference here?
Yeah. Great. Let's talk about the future. So
Okay.
obviously you're starting a new business. And I really like that helping people get to that next level and communicating correctly. I think it's probably something we all need because sometimes it's hard to communicate the thoughts that are in your mind. So there's a few key trends going on, right? There's AI. AI
Yes.
and data are very closely related. There's communication. There's looking at how the whole like business environment might change over the next few years. So what are your thoughts around the future and what does that look like?
Okay. First, let me just say this. The program I'm building is not just about communication. There is really a whole lot of lessons over the 30-year career, but communication is definitely one part of it. And I think this is important because in the more technical roles, we forget and we think it's about the knowledge and having the competency and the technical skills to do things. We forget about communication. We forget about business. We forget about how to advocate for ourselves. We forget about how to put ourselves in the right place. There's just so many more things. So it's not just about communication. And there's a whole program that I'm building about that with a soft launch coming later this year. Your question about the future and AI. So here's a couple of thoughts. And I speak a lot about that. Like I said, in my new role, it's an advisor, an international keynote speaker, and a coach. Those are the different areas where I'm focusing. And I'm bringing, like I said, data, leadership, and career, which are my favorite subjects that I'm passionate about. So I speak a lot about the implications of AI, for example, to the organization, but always to us people as the workforce. So one of the things I would say is that it's here to stay. I think AI, first of all, AI has been around for a very long time. I think there's a whole lot of hype around generative AI these days. Having been in enterprise architecture, having assessed so many different technologies over the years, I can tell you that what I feel about generative AI and all the hype around it today, tomorrow it will be yesterday's news.
Mm.
Everything that we talk about, and so many people are making big investment decisions, big business decisions that are masked as business decisions, but they're mostly, oh, I have to do this of fear of missing out. Tomorrow, all of these greatest things since sliced bread, it will be yesterday's news. And I can speak from and I'm sure you probably attest to this too. Let me know if you feel differently. But over the years, we've seen so many different technologies and hype. That being said, there are great reasons why we should embrace this new technology. The thing is, how do we make sure that we use generative AI or AI, like machine learning and other forms of AI, for the right business reasons? And obviously, before we start talking about AI, one of the things that I have strong views around is let's just understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve or the opportunity that we're trying to create. We don't start with AI. We don't start with whatever the technology might be. Today's generative AI or AI. Yesterday was, I don't know, data mesh. The day before that or the year before that, it was CDPs. It was Lakehouse. It was Hadoop. It was big data. There's always something, right? That's what I'm saying. Tomorrow will be yesterday's news. So we really need to focus on it's here to stay. We need to use it, but use it for the right purpose, which means I'm advocating for let's understand what it is that we need to focus on to make a difference for organizations. And it could be in 30 years, my roles have mostly been at the enterprise level, shared function, contributing to or leading cross-functional, cross-regional, global level roles with enterprise visibility or accountability, right? And one of the things that I've seen is there's always a lot of good reasons to use the new technologies. I've seen over and again the mistake of starting with the technology, which is why I'm so passionate about saying, let's understand what we need to focus on. That being said, especially in big organizations like the ones that I've worked for, there's many great things and many great causes, right? So it's not just finding out when we're saying find the business value, what does that mean? For me, it's also important to ask the question, if I got 10, 15 demands across the regions, across my global organization, but we can only invest in 5 of the 15, which are the right ones to invest in right now? It doesn't mean the other 10 are not right, but how do we prioritize? So this is where we have to look at things like feasibility, complexity. Is it the right time now? What else is impacted? Are there regulations? Do we have the right dependencies already in place in the organization? Do we have the right talent? Are we going to get the return on that investment? There's a lot of different things, and there's a whole framework around prioritizing. So yes, on Gen AI, embrace it because there's so many things, not many things. I think there's still people that do it just for the sake of doing it because it's the hype. So I would say, please don't do that because at the end of the day, outcomes is what matters.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if I use generative AI to do something that's going to cost me 10 times as much when I could just do it with good old traditional tools that we already know and have the skills. It also doesn't matter if I use generative AI or whatever the hype might be, if that problem that I'm solving, it's not the problem I should be focusing on right now. And I'm bleeding customer retention or I'm bleeding operational dollars burning through them like crazy here. So don't do it to say, oh, I've done the shiniest thing, because that's not what's going to keep our businesses thriving. I'll say this as well, Deirdre, that in my mind, or what I've come to understand is that change is going to happen always. So I still see people that want to do it just for the sake of doing it. I still see people that also are pushing back because it's a scary new thing. So to that, I would say change is going to happen no matter what. So for me, it's a way of life. I embrace change. This year has been nothing but change for me personally and professionally every single day, pretty much. So the thing is, the formula that works for me at least is let me understand what this change is. What are the things that I can influence and control? If I can't change it, then how do I work with it? How do I navigate through it? Because I don't want to miss making my life more productive, for example, because productivity, for instance, it's one of the very first successful use cases of using generative AI in particular. That is all the hype these days. So use it so we can make our lives or our businesses more efficient and more effective. Again,
Yeah.
working on the right things, not just faster, but faster on the right things. Don't push back, use it, learn to navigate through it, right?
Mm.
Because it is still here to stay. And I think there's a lot of promise in terms of using this new technology. I think it's working, asking about the future. I think it's expanding, not expanding, but evolving, probably the faster that I've seen any other technology over my lifetime evolve.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that point. It's crazy. Almost every week there's something new. It's
Can't
really
keep
hard
up
to
with
keep.
it anymore. Yes.
I do, and I'm not sure if you would see this. I see generative AI as more of a resource than a tool. And this is a different way, perhaps, that many people would see it, because I suppose in the past, tools would help you do your own work quicker. And so you could argue that generative AI does a similar thing. But I think the access to information and being able to disseminate information, which is such a big problem in working through huge databases for humans who want to do change in organizations, that step, that kind of resource step, which is very boring for people who work in change. And now I've got to
Mm-hmm.
find documents, I've got to find the documents, I've got to find the information, I've got to then try interview and check with everybody. I think that has been the biggest aha moment for me personally when it comes to AI or generative AI, because to be more specific, because that work, that kind of manual crunching, of course, you can do queries and you can do those kind of things, but the scale at which you can do that with AI is phenomenal. So now my question is, would you consider, if you're looking at generative AI, there's
Mm-hmm.
pros and cons. I agree with you. And if people can't ask correct questions, like good questions, and cannot prompt the AI properly and really know
Mm-hmm.
how to structure their own information and data, they're not going to get great outputs. It's as simple as that. But do you see, if you look at AI, are you looking at it from a, this is now going to change our business operating model at some point? Or is this something that's just an enhancement that comes into the organization? Where do you see the future going? Because it can integrate into everything, but how and why? And to your point, what problem is it solving at the end of the day?
Right.
Mhm.
I think right now it is a great resource. Some people may call it a tool, others may refer to it as a resource. Either way, I think it's there, it's available. I think it would be silly of us even to just get uncomfortable because we can quickly get comfortable. I use these tools every day because they do raise productivity. They do save me time. It's especially for brainstorming. It's as if you have a trusted advisor right there. But to your point, and hopefully people realize this, a couple of things here. Don't take everything it says for what it says as if it's 100% accurate. Also realize that different large language models could give a different answer to the same question. And I fully agree with you that how you ask the question makes a difference. As a matter of fact, about 3 or 4 months ago, I think it was when I read a Computer World article that was eye-opening for me. It was insightful for me, asking generative AI large language model to tell you, hey, give me a code snippet for doing XYZ. It's an easy thing. What comes back, it's accurate in terms of what the code is doing. However, according to that article, only about 35 to 40%, the acceptance rate, it's about 35 to 40% to actual levels as it is. Why? Because the code might have been accurate, but it wasn't exactly doing what it needed to do from a context perspective, from a what do we need to do perspective. And that's a lot to do with how the prompt was asked and how also the large language model understood this. It's a mistake to think that if we ask a question, number one, it will absolutely understand what we mean to ask. And it's on both. It's on how we prompt, what kind of words, how we use it. So again, get comfortable. The more you ask, the more comfortable you're getting with it, but also test it. We all have heard also about hallucinations, and I actually have a personal story. I think this will be interesting, and maybe we'll just drive the point a little bit. So I'll share this story with hallucinations, which means the point I'm trying to make is don't just take everything the model will tell you. Different models will give you different answers to the same question, and every one of them, still we have to look at it with a thoughtful eye and validate it. So I came across this one article, this blog once that was actually about me, but it was posted in public on the website of a modern data analytics and AI platform. So you know how we're saying it's great, we can get to all this information. Actually, this particular product, it's one of the current vendors out there. They're using generative AI. Their whole idea about the product is we are using large language models and we're creating some money layers and we can get answers based on your data to you very quickly. That's great. This is an actual business. They have customers. They are looking for customers. They're a startup in, I don't remember what series of funding they are right now, but it's an actual business, which is an actual website. And you know how usually you go to businesses, websites, and they say, here's who we are, our services, our products, resources, our team, and so forth. They had a resources, a blog area. And I came across an article that was talking about me.
Wow.
Now, it was about 60-40 made up hallucinations and actual information. I could very easily, first of all, I came across it all by chance, right? Because it had my name in it. It was about 60% hallucinations. What it did was look at one of the podcasts that I've done out there and it summarized it. But here's a couple of ideas. First of all, I could tell very easily that it was generative AI generated. It was very well structured. But it was saying Dora is great. Dora, with her intelligence and with her expertise in data and our product, totally turned around this retail organization
It
that
is
was
a product.
about to go bankrupt. And now, and he gave an example of what data we looked at and how we turned it around. And now the customers are coming back and the retailer is doing great. It also said things like Dora is world renowned with a PhD in data science from MIT. I don't have a PhD in data science. Thank you, but it's not true. Dora's mentor is John Smith, I think it said. John Smith, also world renowned MIT professor. It even had, Deirdre, it had a paragraph with my memorable quote. And you know what that was? It was a phrase that I did say in that podcast in one context. And then it took another phrase that I did say in a different context, put them together, flipped one word, made it my memorable quote, and wrote a whole paragraph about my made up memorable quote.
It's shocking.
So
It's shocking.
that's a real story. I obviously reached out to the company. I spoke to the CTO and the CEO. They apologized. They took it down. They took it down from the Google Index. I have copies of it because I kept it. I have it, but you're not going to find that out there in the public anymore. Took and they took ownership and they said, I'm sorry, that shouldn't have happened, which I believe them and I gave them credit for being so prompt in responding. Although fast forward 2 months later, I realized same story they did with somebody else. Then I was a little bit suspicious and I'm not quite clear how honest that was or wasn't. But here's what's happening here. Number one, we as consumers of this information, the whole human in the loop idea, 100%. As organizations, we can't just rely on what any one of them, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Anthropic, any of them, right? What they say. We cannot rely on them. We need to validate. But even for personal use, right? But then there's this other aspect of it too. This is an actual business out there. It's a startup, but it's a business. They have customers. They are selling the product to new customers. I would feel a little bit uncomfortable if I knew as a prospective client that, hey, if you can't actually manage just what you put on your company's website, what is the type of due diligence then that you do behind under the hood of this generative AI, large language model based product that you're creating? So there's a responsibility from being a supplier of these platforms and tools from that perspective. And there's a responsibility from us as consumers, if we're doing it for our personal or professional individuals, or from the organization perspective. All the way back to your original question, I think what you asked, is it here to stay? It's here to stay. Change is going to happen. Embrace it, use it, but now with our eyes closed. Validate, absolutely. AI governance, I think, is something that needs to be part of it, just like we were doing data governance. I always look at governance as enablement, and I have a long history in data governance, right? I never look at governance as constrict me from doing something, but more as enable me, because you're keeping me from things I shouldn't go to. You're telling me you're good to go here, but don't touch this, because why? Maybe there's a regulation and you're going to pay dearly. Maybe you don't understand. You're building this, but you don't realize, especially in our enterprises and enterprise architecture, again, business data, solutioning, technical has helped me with this, is that large organizations, if we do something here, it's like the right hand doesn't talk to
Yeah.
the left hand. So that's with the data as well. You can't define customer. I've worked for organizations where customer was defined differently in one P&L versus another P&L. How can, as a single organization, then know how many customers I have?
This is something that I think a lot of people who aren't in enterprise or any form of architecture analysis or data in generally don't really understand the importance of words. That the terms that you use to describe things, systems need that in order to be able to do analysis, be able to make decisions, be able to provide the correct reporting and the content and so forth. Yes, you have to do qualitative analysis on a lot of these things, but that's actually a problem if businesses are interpreting things or defining things as two completely different things. It's scary, and people think, oh, it's just words. I'm like, all of AI, all of programming, all of data, it's all about words. So when you get it wrong at the very high level, it just ricochets all the way down. And it just has this terrible consequence that people don't realize. This is why it's so important to agree on these things up front. Have your glossary or your library of content that will help people understand what we mean when we say customer.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, I think, look, every time that we do put in enough, I'm not saying go ad nauseum, right? And that's a conversation coming from the enterprise data, enterprise business, enterprise architecture, whatever, right? Coming from that vantage point, it's a conversation that I've had so many times throughout my career. I'm not saying ad nauseum, but good enough understanding of who downstream depends on what I'm doing. And what does this mean if I build something here, even as something as simple as customer, right? And we take these things for granted, but to your point, they don't mean the same, and we don't put enough thought into it, enough time to understand what it means. But what I found is that when we do that, everything else goes so much faster. So it's a fallacy, really. It's just a misconception out there that if you take time to architect, it's gonna cost you more, take you longer. It's the opposite. And I'm sure you've heard this before. You probably use it yourself, but it just makes so much sense for me, the whole analogy with building a house, right? It's okay. I'm building a house. I'm only needing the first floor, the ground floor this year, right? But I know I might have my children, my grandchildren coming to visit next year. I know next year I'm going to be building a second floor. I would want a strong enough foundation, but even more than that, I would want to know, am I going to build bathrooms on the second floor? How many bedrooms? These are very high level questions, so that I know that I position the pipes now inside my walls in a
Yeah.
way that I can just expand and scale next year. Otherwise, can I do it? Sure. Is it going to cost me more time and money? 1,000% it is, because if I don't think about it ahead of time, so I don't really go faster, and we don't really implement something that it's going to cost us less. And we keep falling into this trap. But I
I
think it's
know.
because we're being measured on the wrong things.
Yes.
We are We are looking at check the mark and do it every team their own versus, hey, what does this really matter? And how do we make sure that we give the right incentives to our people, starting all the way from divisional leaders all the way down? How do we make sure that we're measured on something that we as one team can go further together? When we talk, it's like at the simplest example that I can think of right now. If I have a family of four, say two parents, two children, do we talk to each other and we make sure that we have one type of
You
meal, or are we going to
agree?
have
Yeah.
four different things? It's going to cost us a lot more. A very simplistic example, but it's just talking to each other and
It's
agreeing
really,
what's important for our organization so that we can just drive those synergies.
yeah. I always the building story because it's more practical, right? People can understand the concept. I mean, a lot of people build their own houses in New Zealand or have historically, and you can see the difference between an architected house and a non-architected house. It's very obvious, right? Not only in
Yeah,
design, but in features and functions and all of those. So I agree, we should have an architecture first approach to change and also the structure of the organizations, particularly in light of AI, because
I
now
agree.
is absolutely the time. Because if you do not have, even if you have a good conceptual level, conceptual design or conceptual data structure of what your business does at a capability level, let's say, even if it's not absolutely, even it's still a straw man view, it's still better than nothing. And it's still going to give you much better insight into what your AI strategy might be in the future, rather than just kind of, oh yeah, we'll have an AI project. And I'm like, no, you don't want an AI project. You want to architect this thing properly and work from that start. So you want to use it, but there's a difference between using it and architecting it. Like there's a big difference. So yeah, it's very interesting.
100%. 100%. A couple of things. A couple of years back, I had written an article and it got published. It actually made the cover story. But anyway, it was the top three pitfalls about just on our way to being data driven. Successful data strategy and implementation of that, right? And my very first pitfall there was that even data strategy is really not about the data, it's about the business. It's the same thing here when we're saying, oh, we're having an AI project. To me, right there, that's the wrong mindset, because then we're talking about the technology versus talking about what is it that we're trying really to hit in terms of how we're streamlining our operations, how we're, I don't know, improving the lifetime customer value, finding where our inventory really is, and we can answer those questions, whatever the KPI is, right? By the time, the moment that we start talking about it in terms of technology, we're already on the wrong path, I think. And it is so hard. One of the things that I found over my years is that I've been one of those business-minded technical people where at times I might be one of the most technical people, and yet even with functional side folks, I've been in so many cases the person that says, but let's just understand what we're trying to do here, the problem. Okay, let me ask you this question, Deirdre. Have you seen business requirements? And I know we're doing more user stories in the more agile, but in business requirements documents, whatever it is, even if it's in the user story format, where it's more a pseudo technical solution, it's a
Yep.
pseudo solution document or story versus what are we trying to achieve from a business perspective. It's almost as if you got to ask those why. I've given a talk once, what did they call it? The business data purpose mindset. And it was a lot around business requirements and how really to work with our stakeholders. And part of that framework is to really keep on peeling the onion, asking those, it's called like the five whys framework, right? Keep on asking those questions, obviously in a form of intelligent, smart, in the moment, present in the conversation, listening and asking the right questions to help have a more productive and more effective dialogue with our stakeholders to really get down to the point of it. Because I have requirements, well, Oh, we want to build a data lake because we're going to have our customer 360. How do you know that the data lake is really the right solution? What is it that we're really trying to solve? Because we can have so many different solutions. I don't always need a screwdriver. Maybe all I need is a hammer to hammer the nail. I don't need the screwdriver. So, yes.
It is such a problem. And it just doesn't seem to stop. It's maybe there's a group that comes in and says, "Oh, this is what you should be doing," and actually, if you do push back and ask questions, it's seen as you being maybe negative. But the problem sits at the end always, and that's where you can measure if it was a good decision. And that's what I mean. Is something solved, or we just have another version of the same problem? That's where it boils down to. So we just put a band-aid on something, but it's not actually been resolved. So yeah, it's a massive challenge. And I think that the problem is more complex. So if you look at just simply, if you're doing a change project and there are requirements and there's data and there's all kinds of things, you've got cultural differences, you've got financial challenges, you've got the level of training that people have had. In other words, there's multiple people that might be on the project that don't actually have the skill set. So they're making assumptions immediately around certain things. All of these things lead to, it's like your root cause analysis is actually more of that fishbone model. And some time, just like we spoke about with AI and architecting the landscape first, some time needs to be put in to understand the root cause of what it is we want to solve to make sure we solve the right problem.
Yes.
But if you look at from an executive point of view, and you've been working with a lot of the senior executives, they often don't have time to wait for information. There's a push. Here's the strategy for the next 2, 3 years. We need to change this. The problem is weakly defined, and we've got a vendor of choice. So, how would you approach that? Because that's a very typical landscape for change in most organizations.
I'm going to go back to something that we started with. I think for me, it boils down to understanding that people are not going to engage, fund the project where you're asking for, be interested, unless they realize, unless they understand how it's helping them.
Mhm.
And to do that, it takes, again, first of all, realizing that matters. That really, whatever we communicate it from the perspective of how is this going to help the person? What would that person want to understand? And it could be the same proposition, but if I'm talking to my CFO versus my COO, it's a different story. It's a different example I'm going to use to try and relate to them. And I'm saying I'm going to bring it back to where we started the conversation with how crucial communication skills are, especially for us technical people, because there is a whole lot of technical expertise and architecture and data and business expertise. And there's a lot of competency, and those are hard
Yeah.
scientific skills. And the soft skills, which in my mind really are the hardest. And I know that's a cliche, but
Yeah.
really, I really believe that I'm a perpetual learner of how can I communicate to the person I'm talking to in a more effective way what I'm trying to say in a way that they understand. So to your question, yes, I don't have time. So how do we actually get it down to a very crisp, clear message that the person I'm talking to or the group that I'm talking to understands it their way? So for me, when I understood things like, for instance, and these are some of the things that I wish I knew early in my career, because for strategic growth of our programs and for growth in our careers, that's why I think it's not the only thing, but all around these soft skills, including communication, is important. The moment I realized that, first of all, when I say things, the way that in my head I think I come across versus how others see me, it are two different things. So first, we got to realize that's reality. Secondly, I need to realize, or when I realize that when I'm speaking to you, for example, Deirdre, that we might be speaking about the same thing. But the images that I have in my head and the things that I can relate in my head about what I'm speaking are different than the images that you have in your head, because You've had a different experience. You had a different life. You're unique. I'm unique, right? So for me, it doesn't matter how I understand it. What it matters is that I make sure that I communicate in a way that it really relates to you, resonates to you. The hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my global role throughout my 30 years, in the past 20 or so of the 30 years, roughly speaking, were global visibility, global accountability roles, was to put the onus on me to understand, oh, who am I speaking to today? Let me find the
Yeah.
most that I can about what are their pain points? What does the job look like? What do they care? I've driven data transformation, right? From idea, put the strategy, spoke to the executives, got the funding, build the function from the ground up. The people, the product, the services, the technology implementation, hooking into the rest of the processes, right? There's a lot of different things. That is driving global transformation. So from talking to the executives, even after that, it's okay that the executive said yes. You have the actual people that are doing the work every day to talk to. So if I'm speaking to someone that it's at this part of the process, and maybe I'm speaking to someone on the manufacturing floor, for example, versus I'm speaking to someone that's in sales, but they're both touching things that they have to come together, right? And it's part of that data transformation. The onus was on me to understand what are some of the challenges that this person on the
Yeah.
manufacturing floor or in the back office is coming across, so I can use examples and stories that they can relate to help them understand what it is that I'm talking about. Otherwise, and I'm not talking about technical jargon because that's a no, even the stories that I use in plain English, right? That would be a different story than what I would say to someone that's more around sales or marketing or something else. But that means I need to put time and effort to learn more about their challenges.
Mm.
But me doing that means that I can have a more engaging conversation and I can help these people understand what's in it for them, how what I'm proposing here. Why we should do architecture when everybody just wants to build? Why should we talk to these other people and getting customer to mean the same thing? Why we should look into this other thing and really also find something else that we don't do a good job of is how do we orchestrate things? There's a lot of different programs and projects. How do we figure out the dependencies of whole programs so that we as a company coordinate, orchestrate, and organize them in a way where it's to our advantage as a company. We're not fighting with each other trying to build something here that it's dependent on this other thing, but we're not deploying this until 6 months after we build here, which means we can't really, we're building half-baked things, right? And then we have to go back. So how do I actually understand where everybody's coming from so I can communicate in a way that it relates to them? And that will then help me sell really, because that's what it is. Communication, one aspect of it,
Is a pitch,
either we
right?
like it or not, is really
Mm.
selling what it is that we're talking about. And selling is nothing but how do I help you understand what it is that, but you do have different experiences, you do have different things, you images that come to mind when I speak to you. So it is on me to figure
Mm.
out what I can say that will resonate with you so that you can, okay, engage more. And then I'll learn more from you and it becomes a more productive or more engaging dialogue. And then we can make more effective, more meaningful progress
Mm.
onto this big program. And that, I don't care that call that soft skills. It's one of the hardest things.
It
And
is
to the
so
day I
hard.
die, I'm going to keep on learning how to get better at it every day because it's not easy and it takes a lot of practice, but we can get better every day. It starts with being aware that's important and then investing into it.
It's a very unique human experience, right? And understanding tacit and information and understanding body language, culture, all of those things. You won't be able to replicate that at any near point right now in AI. It's not possible. And so looking to the future, I would say that I agree with you. Being able to really clearly articulate what you mean. I'm not really good at this, to be completely honest. I struggle. I need help with this. I feel like I'm not bad, but I wouldn't call myself an expert communicator. And sometimes you have to just go out and start and try and work with people and get to know them. But I agree with you. That is the hardest bit of all because they could just be in a bad mood. And there you are. So it's so complex, but we rely on that language to really get things done. And we have to do it. So we've covered quite a bit today. But I have one more question for you.
Yes.
So I like to ask this question. If you could go back in time, Dora,
Yes.
and give yourself a personal piece of advice, what would it be?
Like I said, I wish I knew so many things back when I started. It would be, there's a lot of different things. In one thing, huh? If it's one, I'm going to give you, okay, let's think. One thing would be to just understand how crucial communication is and learning to work with people. That would be one thing. But I'll give you a second one, a little bit more specific other than this general umbrella. So many of us suffer from imposter syndrome. And earlier on in my career, when I first started, I always thought everybody else knew so much better than me, which was undermining the value that I could bring, because what that meant is that I was more quiet and not asking a lot of questions and just listening and trying to learn from others, which is a great thing. And I do that to this day. But I would say don't hold back your curiosity. Don't underestimate the value. Each one of us really has a very unique point. And I believe in that diversity of thought and building on each other's ideas for greater things, better things. So what I would say is just do it. It's okay, as uncomfortable as it is, just go with it. Despite it or with it, just take the little step. It gets easier with time. Raise the hand, make the comment, ask the question, just give it a try. It gets easier with time, but the reward and the opportunities that it opens, it's well worth being comfortable while doing it at the beginning. It does get much easier later.
Yeah, I think if people, and it's a real common theme, is that imposter syndrome where you think that everyone else knows more than you. And only when you get older, you realize maybe they don't. Maybe it's not as particular as we might have thought back then.
I'm going to say this because this might help the audience. It's been probably 7 or 8 years now that I've been part of different advisory boards of organizations, which means that the people that I'm on these boards are exceptional professionals. First of all, they take time out of the day to spend into this, but they're all CIOs, CDOs, CDAOs, right? CISOs, right? So in the C-suite. And after all these years and being in so many conversations, I'm like on 4 or 5 different boards right now, 4 boards, I think. What I've come to realize is that not everybody knows everything, no matter how high up you are on that ladder. And we're all people. We have common concerns and things that we worry about, and we can all learn more and we can all do better. And even people, as a matter of fact, oh, okay, this is just a couple of hours ago, I was reading an article, a study from Korn Ferry, and one of the figures that they had was that around the world, and they had every region the specific percentage, but on average around the world, CEOs that took part of that study, about 70% of them, 70% of them said that they had imposter syndrome, meaning said that they felt that they didn't think that they were knowing much, doing as well as they should be. They had imposter syndrome. CEO in the title, 70% as an average around the world. Out of the press is me reading it a couple of hours ago. So there you go. No matter where you are in that career,
Yeah.
hopefully that just encourages people to just take the little step and ask that question. Go over whatever the uncomfortable point is.
Okay, so how can people get hold of you, Dora? So what is the best way? LinkedIn?
LinkedIn. I'm going to have a soft launch later this year. DoraBoussias.com will be available, which will give a lot more information about what I'll be focusing on going forward. But LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm there every day. It's a great community. So reach out on LinkedIn, and yeah, and happy to connect. Even with everything that we said here, if anyone in the audience listens to this and has any questions or thoughts that they want to share about anything I said, please do reach out. Happy to. That's how we get better, when we communicate and learn from each other.
Awesome interview. Thanks,
Thank you.
Dora. Highly knowledgeable. So thank you for sharing with us today. I really do appreciate your time, and especially just giving some insights around the C-suite, really just giving people a little bit more around that space. So thanks for sharing a bit of that as well. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Deirdre. It's been great speaking to you today.